Avoidants don't panic when you cry, they panic when you go quiet. Avoidants have a strange relationship with emotion, yours and their own. When you cried, when you explained, when you tried to fix what was breaking, they didn't panic. Not because they didn't care, but because your emotion was familiar. It kept them in the role they understood, the distant one, the one who withdraws while you reach, the one who shuts down while you open up. Your tears didn't threaten their defenses, they validated them. But your silence, that's different. Your silence isn't rejection, it's a mirror. It reflects every behavior they avoided looking at. It forces them to confront the truth they've buried under years of self-protection. And for the first time, they have to face themselves without you softening the impact, without you cushioning the blow, without you explaining away their coldness or rationalizing their inconsistency. Silence removes the emotional buffer they relied on. It exposes the reality they tried to outrun. Your quiet doesn't just go unnoticed the way they pretend, it shakes them because silence doesn't give them something to push against. It doesn't give them an argument to escape from. It doesn't give them emotions they can blame you for. Silence gives them nothing, and that nothing is their greatest fear. In your quiet, they sense a shift, the beginning of emotional detachment. Not dramatic, not angry, not loud, but final. Avoidants know the difference between temporary distance and genuine withdrawal. And when you stop trying, the air changes. You don't beg for clarity anymore. You don't ask where things stand. You don't bring up the conversations they always avoided. You move differently, respond differently, breathe differently. The emotional pressure disappears, and instead of feeling relieved, they feel exposed. This is the moment their panic begins, even if they hide it beneath the same calm expression they've always worn. They can sense that your silence isn't a tactic, it's a turning point. They feel the loss before they're willing to admit it. Avoidants don't panic when you express emotion, because they expect you to. They're prepared for that version of you, the one they believe will always try harder, explain deeper, love louder. But the version of you who is finally quiet, the version who has stopped rescuing the connection, stopped validating their distance, stopped making excuses for their behavior, that version terrifies them. Your silence signals something they can't control. You've reached the limit they didn't believe existed. They always assumed you'd bounce back, reopen the door, reignite the conversation. They underestimated the moment your heart shifted from holding on to letting go. And now they feel it. The emotional space growing, the distance widening, the security of your effort dissolving. In that silence, they realize the one thing they never expected: you're not trying anymore. And this time, they're the one who doesn't know what to do. They thought you'd always chase until you stop chasing. Avoidants survive on patterns, not emotional intimacy. They don't trust connection, but they trust predictability. And for a long time, you were predictable in the way they depended on most. No matter how distant they became, no matter how cold their tone or inconsistent their effort, you were the one who reached back in. You were the one who initiated the conversations, repaired the misunderstandings, and tried to stabilize an unstable bond. It wasn't weakness, it was love. But to an avoidant, your consistency became something they unconsciously counted on. Your chase became the glue that held the dynamic together. So when that chase suddenly ends, the avoidant doesn't just notice, they unravel. Avoidants rely on the subtle power that comes from believing you'll always be the one to try. They assume that no matter how far they retreat, you'll come find them. It gives them a warped sense of safety, the illusion that they can pull away without consequences, that you'll always bridge the gap. But when that pattern breaks, when you stop chasing, stop explaining, stop trying to win back what they kept pushing away, their entire sense of control collapses. Because the moment you stop reaching, the avoidant realizes something they've avoided confronting for years. They were never in control at all. Your effort was the only thing holding the connection together. At first, they may convince themselves they don't care. They'll pretend the distance is mutual. They'll act unfazed, as if your silence is exactly what they wanted. But internally, the shift is undeniable. Without your pursuit, the dynamic they built, the dance of pull back and chase, disintegrates. The avoidant suddenly finds themselves standing in the same emotional space they once ran from, but this time they can't escape it. Your lack of movement forces them to sit with emotions they've been dodging: fear, regret, uncertainty, longing. And those feelings hit harder because they're not used to carrying them alone. Your absence removes their safety net. They never realized how much they depended on your emotional initiative until it was gone. And in that quiet, they begin to replay everything. The messages you used to send, the reassurance you used to offer, the love they never fully accepted but always expected. It dawns on them that the version of you who chased was not guaranteed, that your effort had an expiration date, that you were human, not a constant. And so the avoidant starts to feel something they rarely allow themselves to feel: panic. Not the loud kind, the silent, internal panic of realizing a door they assumed would always open might actually be closing. The panic of recognizing that the person who carried the relationship is no longer carrying it. The panic of losing not just you, but the emotional security of being wanted without earning it. And when they finally understand that you're no longer chasing, something shifts inside them. A realization that hits deeper than any argument ever could. They didn't expect to care this much, but now it's too late to pretend they don't. Avoidants are used to being the one who pulls away. It's their comfort zone, their defense mechanism, their way of staying safe without ever having to be vulnerable. They create emotional distance, like it's armor, stepping back, shutting down, withdrawing into themselves whenever closeness feels too real. And for a long time, that pattern worked because you were the one who leaned in every time they leaned out. But nothing prepares an avoidant for the moment. The roles reverse. Your detachment hits harder than their distance ever could, because it's the one thing they never saw coming. They expect themselves to shut. They never expect you to. When an avoidant distances themselves, they feel in control. But when you detach, that control disappears instantly. Your detachment is different. It's not reactive, not emotional, not dramatic. It's calm. It's grounded. It's quiet. And that quiet hits them in places their own silence never reached. Avoidants distance themselves to feel powerful, to create space, to reduce the emotional intensity. But when you mirror that distance, when you emotionally unplug, stop fighting, stop pursuing, stop trying to close the gap, the distance doesn't comfort them. It confronts them. Suddenly, the space they once created doesn't feel safe. It feels threatening. Because this time, they didn't choose it. You did. Your detachment challenges the story they've always told themselves, the story that you needed them more, that you'd never leave, that your emotions would always close the distance. But when you stop, when you pull your energy back and redirect it toward yourself, they're forced to confront a truth they never anticipated. They were never the one with the power. Your emotional presence was the foundation of the connection. Your effort, your patience, your love, that was the glue. And once that disappears, they feel the collapse instantly. Avoidants often believe that their distance protects them from pain, but your detachment creates a different kind of pain, one they can't deflect, deny, or outrun. Because your withdrawal isn't about punishing them, it's about protecting yourself. And that makes it hit deeper. They can rationalize your tears, your frustration, your attempts to reconnect. They can label those emotions as too much, but they can't rationalize your absence. There's no excuse for it, no story that makes it comfortable. All they're left with is the realization that the connection is slipping, and this time it's not because of their fear, but because of your clarity. Your detachment forces them to feel the emotional consequences of their behavior in a way their own avoidance never did. It exposes everything they tried to hide from: their fear of intimacy, their fear of losing control, their fear of not being enough. And when they finally recognize that you're not distancing as a reaction, but as a decision, it hits them harder than they'll ever admit. Because deep down, they always believed you'd stay invested. Your detachment proves that even the strongest heart has a breaking point, and they pushed you right to it. Avoidants spend so much of their lives blaming intimacy for the discomfort they feel. They convince themselves that closeness is dangerous, that love is overwhelming, that commitment suffocates them. It's easier for them to believe the problem lies in the other person, in your needs, your emotions, your desire for connection, than to confront the truth that terrifies them. Their fear is the very thing destroying the relationships they long for, but can't fully receive. When you were present, when you were loving, when you were steady, they interpreted your warmth as pressure, your honesty as intensity, your consistency as threat. But the moment you step back, the moment the emotional field goes quiet, the truth becomes impossible to deny. They realize your love wasn't the problem. Their fear was. Avoidants build emotional narratives that justify their distance. They convince themselves that you're too much, or that they're not ready, or that relationships are too hard. But your absence breaks that narrative instantly because now there is no emotional intensity coming from you, no expectations, no pressure, no conversations asking for more. The silence exposes the real source of discomfort, not your love, but their inability to tolerate it. And when an avoidant sits in that realization, it hits them with a clarity they've been avoiding their entire life. The connection they ran from was the same connection they secretly craved. In your presence, they were able to rationalize their fear. In your absence, those rationalizations collapse. Suddenly, they remember the softness you brought into their life, how your presence grounded them, how your steadiness gave them a sense of safety they didn't know how to accept. They remember your patience, your understanding, the way you tried to reach them without forcing them. And the irony becomes painfully clear. The very love they pushed away was the love they couldn't replace. They realized that it wasn't your affection that overwhelmed them, it was their inability to hold it. It wasn't your emotional depth that scared them, it was the vulnerability it required from them. This is the moment regret begins to form, quiet, private, and undeniable. Avoidants don't express regret easily. They won't admit it out loud, but internally, they start replaying everything. The messages they ignored, the moments they dismissed, the closeness they rejected. They see now that you weren't trying to trap them, you were trying to connect. And every time you offered love, they responded with fear. Every time you reached out, they stepped back. Now, standing in the empty space your absence created, they understand just how much of the relationship's emotional weight you carried. Your love wasn't the problem. It was the mirror that revealed the emotional work they never did. And now that the mirror is gone, they're left facing the emptiness created not by your actions, but by their avoidance. That's when the truth finally hits. Your love didn't break the relationship, their fear did. And by the time they understand that, you've already learned to love yourself enough not to keep trying to fix someone who won't face their own reflection. Avoidants are far more perceptive than they appear, even when they act detached, distracted, uninterested, or emotionally numb. They feel energetic shifts before they understand them. And the moment your energy stops reaching for them, even slightly, they sense it instantly. Not because they're tuned into your emotions, but because your emotional availability has always been the anchor they subconsciously depended on. Your warmth, your presence, your softness, the way you checked in, the way you initiated every repair, all of that created a quiet emotional rhythm they never admitted they needed. So when that rhythm changes, they feel the absence in their gut before they ever acknowledge it in their mind. At first, the shift is subtle. You respond slower. Your tone becomes calmer, lighter, and less invested. You stop overthinking your words, stop analyzing their moods, stop carrying the emotional weight of the connection. You're still polite, still grounded, still kind, but you're no longer bending yourself to hold the bond together. You're no longer fighting for closeness. Your energy becomes measured, limited, self protective. And this is where the avoidant feels the difference most. Not in what you say, but in what you no longer give. They don't panic immediately. Avoidants often mask their emotional reactions with logic and detachment. But beneath the surface, something shifts. They start rereading your messages twice. They take longer pauses before replying, not because they're avoiding you, but because they're trying to decode the change. They check your social media more. They think about the conversations they used to ignore. They notice that your affection is no longer automatic, and that realization unsettles them. Because they built their entire dynamic around the assumption that your love was steady, reliable, overflowing, even when theirs wasn't. Your energy used to reach for them, now it reaches for yourself. That is what shakes them. Avoidance expect emotional withdrawal when they create distance, but they never expect it when it comes from you. So when they feel the shift, when your heart is no longer leaning in, they experience a quiet discomfort they don't know how to soothe. It's the first stage of emotional recognition, awareness without clarity. They know something changed, but they don't yet understand why. This shift forces them to face a truth they avoided for months or even years. Your presence was not guaranteed. They see now that the ease with which they took you for granted was built on a false belief that your effort would never fade. But now that it has, they begin to fear the one thing that terrifies them most: losing access to the emotional safety you always offered. The avoidant who once claimed they needed space now feels that space closing around them. And for the first time, your energy no longer feels like something they can return to whenever they're ready. It feels like something slipping away. Your shift isn't loud, it's not angry, it's not dramatic. It's quiet, peaceful, grounded. But that's exactly what makes it powerful, because avoidants don't panic when you express emotion. They panic when you stop and when your energy stops reaching for them. They finally understand that the connection they thought they controlled was never theirs to lose. They were simply the last to realize it. Avoidants live their lives believing they're the ones who get to decide when closeness happens and when it doesn't. They think they control the distance, that they can pull away whenever they feel overwhelmed, and you'll simply wait, understanding, patient, ready to reconnect whenever they finally resurface. It gives them a sense of safety, a false belief that they're the one dictating the emotional rhythm of the relationship, but nothing shatters that illusion faster than the moment you become unavailable. Because when the person they always assumed would be there suddenly isn't, that's when an avoidant feels fear in a way their defenses can't protect them from. At first, they try to minimize it. They'll tell themselves you're just busy or just in a mood or just giving space. They try to fit your unavailability into the familiar patterns they understand. But the truth becomes undeniable when they realize you're not just distant, you're detached. You're not withholding affection out of frustration. You're simply not offering it at all. You're not waiting on their next move. You're living your life without needing one. That's when their stomach drops. Because for the first time, the distance isn't something they created. It's something they can't escape. Avoidants don't fear losing the relationship. They fear losing the emotional safety net you provided. Your availability was the one stable thing they could rely on, even while acting inconsistent themselves. You were the emotional constant they believed they could always return to. But when that changes, when your presence is no longer a given, they feel the collapse internally. The security they took for granted disappears, and suddenly they're confronted with a feeling they've spent their whole life avoiding: the fear of losing someone who mattered more than they ever admitted. Your unavailability forces them to confront their own role in the dynamic. They remember the messages they ignored, the invitations they declined, the affection they brushed off. They replay moments where you really tried to connect, to understand, to bridge the emotional gap. They kept widening, and now that the roles have reversed, they feel a kind of emotional imbalance they don't know how to regulate. Your absence reveals something their avoidance kept hidden. You were the source of emotional stability all along. This is where their internal panic begins. They start checking their phone more, not because they need something from you, but because they're afraid they won't hear from you. They draft messages they don't send. They hover between reaching out and retreating, trapped in the conflict between wanting closeness and fearing it. They wonder who else you're talking to, who else gets your attention now, who else you might be giving your emotional energy to, energy that once flowed toward them effortlessly. Your unavailability doesn't just unsettle them, it exposes them. It dismantles the illusion that they were unaffected, untouched, always in control. It shows them that connection was never the threat. Losing it was. And when your presence is no longer accessible, the avoidant realizes something they never expected to face. They pushed away the one person they now wish would come back. Avoidance spends so much of the relationship avoiding one thing: their own inner world. They run from the discomfort of intimacy, from the possibility of rejection, from the vulnerability that love demands. And as long as you were the one fighting for the connection, reaching out, repairing the distance, holding the emotional weight, they never had to confront those fears. You did the emotional labor for both of you. But the moment you stop fighting, the battle doesn't end. It simply shifts. Only now, the avoidant isn't fighting you anymore. They're fighting themselves. Because the silence you leave behind doesn't just create space, it creates a collision between their fear of closeness and their fear of losing you. And that is a war they are not prepared for. When you are fighting for the relationship, they could hide behind their usual defenses. They could pretend that your effort was too much. They could convince themselves that they needed space, that they needed distance, that you were the one making things complicated. But when you stop fighting, when your energy retreats, Your tone softens, your urgency disappears. There's nothing left for them to push against. No conflict, no emotional pressure, no intensity, just the raw truth of their own patterns staring back at them. And for an avoidant, that truth is terrifying. Your withdrawal forces them into a place they've avoided their entire life. Introspection. They begin replaying moments they dismissed, arguments they walked away from, conversations they shut down. Suddenly, memories they once brushed aside now feel heavier. They start realizing how often you tried to understand them, support them, and love them through their walls, and how often they responded with distance instead of gratitude. And the guilt that surfaces from these realizations isn't gentle. It hits them in quiet waves, especially at night or in moments where they would normally expect your presence. Instead of feeling suffocated by the relationship, they now feel suffocated by their own regret. This internal conflict grows stronger because avoidance never believed you'd truly stop fighting. They thought your love was endless, your patience infinite, your presence guaranteed. So when that pattern ends, it destabilizes them emotionally. They begin questioning everything, not just the relationship, but themselves. Why didn't I try harder? Why did I push them away? Why does it hurt now that they're gone? Why can't I stop thinking about them? These questions don't have easy answers, and that's exactly what pushes them deeper into the fight within themselves. Your absence becomes a mirror reflecting the parts of themselves they never wanted to see, their fear of intimacy, their lack of emotional reciprocity, their inability to hold on to someone who actually cared. For the first time, the avoidant realizes that emotional distance didn't protect them. It cost them the one person who genuinely tried, and that realization fractures something inside them. The fight they're having now is not about you, it's about the version of themselves they can no longer ignore. They finally understand that the battle was never against closeness, it was against their own fear. And by the time they realize that, you are already walking toward a life where you no longer have to fight for someone who never fought for you. Avoidants have a predictable rhythm. They pull away, you pull closer. They withdraw, you stabilize. They detach, you reassure. For so long, the dynamic ran on that cycle, not because you were weak, but because you cared enough to hold the connection when they couldn't. And because you consistently showed up, they never imagined a reality where you wouldn't. But emotional independence changes everything. It's the one shift they never prepared for, the one version of you they never thought they'd face. When you no longer need the relationship to feel whole, when you no longer seek validation from their inconsistent affection, when your happiness no longer depends on their emotional participation. The avoidant loses the silent advantage they relied on for so long. Your emotional independence isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's the moment you stop begging for pieces of love and start giving yourself what they never could. It's the moment your inner world becomes louder than your desire to fix them. And that shift unsettles the avoidant because it exposes the truth they've avoided all along. You didn't stay because you needed them, you stayed because you loved them. Once that love no longer requires their presence to feel whole, they realize how deeply they underestimated you. To an avoidant, emotional independence feels like abandonment, even when it isn't. It feels like rejection, even though it's actually self-respect. When you start choosing peace over chaos, and consistency over hope, and self-worth over waiting, something inside them shakes. Not because they suddenly became ready for intimacy, but because the safety net of your devotion disappears. They feel it in the pauses between your messages, in the calmness of your tone, in the new boundaries you set without announcing them. You're no longer trying to decode their mixed signals. You're no longer chasing clarity from someone who avoids it. And that quiet confidence is what makes them panic. Your independence flips the dynamic completely. The avoidant who once believed they had infinite time now realizes the clock was ticking all along. The emotional gap they created to protect themselves now becomes the barrier they can't break. They start wondering who gets the version of you that once belonged to them, the affectionate, intuitive, emotionally present version they took for granted. They wonder who you're connecting with now that you've stopped pouring into them. They replay conversations, noticing how light and unbothered you've become. It's in that shift, that effortless, graceful detachment, that they feel the loss most deeply. Because nothing challenges an avoidant more than someone who refuses to lose themselves while loving them. Your emotional independence shows them the truth. You were not the fragile one. You were not the clingy one. You were not the problem. You were the grounded one, the anchor they misunderstood as a burden. And when they finally see you standing strong without them, something inside them collapses. They realize too late that the version of you who needed them is gone, and the version of you who no longer does is the one they'll miss the most. Avoidants spend their lives running from loss, yet they rarely understand it until it's already happened. They retreat from intimacy to protect themselves, to keep their hearts safe, to avoid vulnerability, but they do so under the illusion that the other person will always be there. They assume your love is infinite, your patience unending, your willingness to bridge the distance eternal. And for a long time, they are correct. You reach, you chase, you repair, you carry the weight of a connection they can't yet sustain. But the moment you step back, the moment you finally stop trying, stop explaining, stop pouring into someone who won't meet you halfway, that's when the truth hits them. That's when an avoidant finally feels the loss they have spent their life running from. This moment is quiet. It isn't dramatic. There are no shouting matches, no angry confrontations, no public displays. There is only absence. Mere absence. The way your phone no longer buzzes with messages, the way your energy no longer leans in, the way your patience no longer cushions their distance. They feel it instantly, a vacuum that no amount of avoidance can fill. And suddenly, they are forced to confront a reality they never allowed themselves to face. You are not the problem. Your love, your effort, your emotional clarity, none of it broke the connection. Their fear, their withdrawal, their inability to receive what was offered, that's what destroyed it. And now, with you gone, they feel it. The avoidant begins to replay the entire relationship in slow motion. Every time they withdrew, every time they ignored, every time they turned away, now stands illuminated in the light of your absence. They recognize the effort you put in, the love you gave, without condition, the consistency they relied on but never acknowledged. And with every memory comes a quiet regret, the kind that gnaws at the chest late at night, the kind that wakes them up in the middle of sleep with an unshakable awareness of what they lost. They begin to understand that their fear of closeness was never worth the cost, that the distance they created wasn't freedom, it was loss. And the realization is double-edged. They feel regret, yes, but more than that, they feel powerless. For years, they were the ones dictating distance. They could pull away, disappear, retreat, hide, and you would always find your way back. Until now, they face the ultimate consequence of their patterns. You no longer respond to the push and pull. You no longer chase. You no longer forgive without accountability. You no longer allow them to hide behind their fear. You are gone. And the avoidant finally understands the depth of what they've lost. Not just a person, but a love that chose them, held them, and still waited until they weren't ready. The pain they feel is quiet, private, and unmistakable. It isn't loud or performative because avoidants rarely display emotional devastation outwardly, but inside, their world has shifted. They are confronted with the one truth they could never outrun. Losing you wasn't losing control. It was losing the one person who truly understood them. And that realization hits harder than any argument, any fight, any moment of anger ever could. Because now you are done. And they are the ones left to reckon with it. The final truth of dealing with an avoidant is simple. You cannot fix someone who is unwilling to confront their own fear. They will continue to push, retreat, and protect themselves as long as the dynamic suits them. And for years, you may have bent backward, explained, chased, and accommodated, believing love meant staying through it all. But there comes a moment when love for yourself outweighs love for them. When you realize that your emotional energy is finite and your patience has limits. That's the moment you step back, not to punish, not to manipulate, not to prove a point, but to heal, to reclaim yourself, and to stop carrying a weight that was never yours to bear. And when that happens, the avoidant finally sees the cost of their avoidance, often for the first time. Avoidants don't process loss the way most people do. They don't immediately feel panic. They don't cry openly. They don't chase, at least not at first. They analyze, rationalize, and minimize. They pretend the loss is temporary, that the absence will resolve itself, that you'll circle back. But as the days, weeks, and months pass, The weight of what they ignored begins to press. They start noticing the absence in small ways, the quiet moments, the lack of messages, the unshared experiences. They feel the vacuum of your energy, the emptiness where your warmth once existed. And slowly, invisibly, the realization sinks in. They didn't lose control. They lost access to someone who loved them fully, consistently, and unconditionally. They lost. This is the cruel paradox for an avoidant. They fear intimacy, yet they crave it. They push people away, yet they depend on them. And when you finally remove yourself from their orbit, they face a truth they can't escape. The very presence they resisted was the love they secretly needed. Your absence becomes a mirror, reflecting all the moments they dismissed, all the affection they ignored, and all the vulnerability they avoided. Unlike arguments or ultimatums, your departure leaves no space for denial. There is no excuse. There is only clarity. They can see, if only faintly, the version of you who is patient, kind, and steadfast, a version they could have cherished had they confronted their own fear. You leaving is not vengeance. It is evolution. It is a quiet, profound act of self-respect. You are no longer willing to sacrifice your peace for someone else's comfort. And when an avoidant realizes this, they feel a mixture of regret, longing, and helplessness. They may hope to reclaim what's gone, but deep down, they understand the cost of their detachment. You are no longer the person who accommodates fear, who bends to bridge the distance, who stays despite the coldness. You are the person who chose yourself. And that is the ultimate lesson for an avoidant. Love is not a guarantee, and patience has a limit. When they finally see that you have moved forward, grown, and evolved without them, the truth hits harder than any confrontation ever could. They didn't lose you because you weren't enough. They lost you because they couldn't meet you halfway. And in that final silence, that final absence, they understand that the person they took for granted is no longer available to be taken. Your leaving isn't the end for you, it's your rebirth. And for them, it's the moment of truth they always feared. You were the love they couldn't hold, and now it's gone.